Denver Broncos tight end Greg Dulcich is in line to become the Broncos' top tight end option this upcoming season. What does that mean for guys like Albert Okwuegbunam, Eric Tomlinson, and even Eric Sauber and Andrew Beck in the tight end room? We break that down and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, senior Broncos analyst at Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Both of us also cover the Broncos for the Locked on Network and 9 News. Broncos country, thank you so much for making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite podcast provider, whether you're watching us on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. If you have yet to hit the subscribe or the follow button, make sure you do so you're never out of the loop when it comes to all things Denver Broncos. Every single day all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an off season. Sayre, we'll continue on here today. Yesterday's episode was really jam-packed where we talked about the Denver Broncos running back room and why Melvin Gordon will thrive in an underdog role while Javonte Williams still has some high expectations coming into his second season in the NFL. If you missed that, make sure you go check that out. But today we shift our focus to the tight end group here. And what better way to start things off than by talking about Greg Dulcich, the Broncos draft pick from this year's NFL draft, and something that Nathaniel Hackett himself had said. He gives us something we don't have. I'm excited to break this all down with you, my man.
I am as well. We've talked about inside linebacker maybe being like the weakest position potentially on the Denver Broncos roster, at least as it, on paper, right? But the tight end position is an intriguing one. It doesn't get talked about as much, but obviously the trade of, Russell Wilson bringing Noah Fant to the Seattle Seahawks, taking away the Broncos leader in receptions last season and replacing him really with a lot of question marks, right? Albert Okwuegbunam was the tight end 2 last year. He doesn't have a ton of experience. And Greg Dulcich coming in this year's draft, he's going to be a rookie. He's going to be learning on the fly. So it's not really a very experienced group. And you could argue, I think I saw this in a recent ESPN positional rankings. I think they pegged tight end as the worst position on this team, on this roster. But I think that, Cody, there's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of opportunity for this to become an actual strength for this roster by the time the season's over.
Well, and I think when you look at Dulcich, right, entering as a rookie, there's so much to learn going from a college athlete playing at UCLA, going to the NFL where the competition is vastly different. I mean, you're facing more competitive players that you're going to have to match up against than you are at the collegiate level there. But for Dulcich, I mean, we look at his attributes. He's got great hair, by the way, probably the best on the team. We can make that argument there. But outside of that, he's athletic. He knows how to get open. But I don't want to see the Broncos get into the position. Remember in 2019 when the Broncos had Noah Fant as a rookie, and one of the things that they did was they put him in one-on-one kind of pass block protection against Khalil Mack, Leonard Floyd of the Chicago Bears. And then more recently last year, they did that. They put him in a one-on-one blocking situation against TJ Watt. Sayre, I mean, the Broncos have to find a way to get so creative with how they utilize a guy like Dulcich. I feel like you can't just put him as an inline guy. Like, he offers so much more from the slot. He offers so much more from being put on the outside as a flex option. I just don't see much of a role for him as an inline guy with his hand in the dirt, half in a chip, pass rushers. I think they have other players on the roster, and we'll get to that a little bit later on here in the show here. But for me, Dulcich is a weapon waiting to happen here for this Broncos team. And granted, yes, he has yet to play an NFL down for this Broncos football team. We're looking forward to watching him at training camp next week. But man, it's just so hard to ignore what he did at UCLA and how year in and year out, he got bigger, he got faster, he got stronger, but he also improved as a football player. I tell you what, 17.6 yards per catch in his total career at UCLA. That gives the Broncos the dynamic that Nathaniel Hackett said we simply do not have.
A former walk-on at UCLA, right? A guy that really kind of went from the ground up and had to get a recommendation from his high school coach to even get onto the team, which is, it's kind of crazy to think about looking at this guy, watching him play a handful of 50-plus yard touchdown catch and runs on a number of them at UCLA. So a dynamic big play threat. And you're exactly right. The Broncos can't do and make the same mistakes of previous coaching regimes. Stop trying to shove the square pegs into a round hole. right? Start formulating your offense around the players instead of vice versa or the other way around. Don't try to put Greg Dulcich in those positions where, well, you're a tight end in the NFL. You're going to be expected to block the likes of Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa and TJ Watt. Don't do that to the kid, and don't do that. In Broncos country, if Greg Dulcich drops a pass early on in his career, let's not cut the guy on Twitter this time, okay? I remember with Noah Fant, he
Oh
was cut
man.
at halftime of that Chiefs game that he dropped a couple passes. So I think that with Greg Dulcich, he's going to be such a fascinating player to watch, isn't he? Like you mentioned, the Broncos have the opportunity to flex him into the slot. They have the opportunity to get number 80 and number 85 out there on the field at the same time. Or what if you have Greg Dulcich as a big slot on one side and then Tim Patrick or Cortland Sutton on the other? The options are endless there, and Nathaniel Hackett should be absolutely drooling over the opportunities that he's got with this personnel at his disposal. Greg Dulcich, like you mentioned at the top, and like Nathaniel Hackett said in that episode of Behind the Broncos, he brings what we don't have he brings something we don't have currently on this roster, on this offense. And so I think from that vantage point, Greg Dulcich, especially for you dynasty fantasy football players, a very intriguing option, even though the narrative, Cody, what have we been hearing? Russell Wilson doesn't like to throw to tight ends. I think we're going to see that change in 2022.
Yeah, playmakers galore here for this Broncos offense heading into this upcoming season. Even another point, too, when we talk about the tight end position, we talk about a guy like Greg Dulcich. I mean, the Broncos room right now, we know based on the interview we had with Phil Milani of Broncos TV earlier this offseason, Albert O said, hey, they've entrusted me to be in line to be the tight end one for this team. We're talking about Albert Okwuegbunam. But realistically, it's kind of wide open right now. Tight end one is wide open for the taking between these guys inside that room. And it's not a bad problem to have. I mean, like we talked about yesterday between Javonte Williams, Melvin Gordon, it's not a bad thing if you have multiple guys who can be the number one option. It doesn't matter about who's number one on the depth chart. Each of these players, we expect the Broncos at least 3 tight ends to get some active playing time this upcoming season. It's just about maximizing those opportunities. And if the Broncos are winning games here, I'll go back to what you said yesterday. Nobody is going to give a hoot about it. So what does that mean for a guy like Albert Okwuegbunam, who enters the season with some high expectations after being a carryover from the last regime, and potentially, with the addition of Greg Dulcich, it puts more pressure on Albert O. How can he overcome that? And where are some areas he can grow to become the Broncos' number one tight end option? We get to that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at Dave. Hindsight is 2020, and you can't change the past. But what if you could get a little bit of help from your future self? Maybe you'd ask to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or catch up on bills. And you can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief that they need with extra cash here today. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees do apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Future you will thank you. Albert Okwuegbunam enters the 2022 NFL season with some high expectations after being a 4th-round draft pick and somebody that the Broncos had asked Drew Lock, specifically his former teammate at Mizzou, should we draft this guy? The Broncos did, and you could see the intangibles right away as a rookie in that New England Patriots game where he had a catch and run across the middle of the field. He flashes the size and the athleticism and the big bodiness to break tackles, which could give the Broncos a dynamic element on offense. But how does he fit in here with the addition of Greg Dulcich? Once again, Broncos country, thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcast or on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. Sayre, shifting our conversation now to Albert O, who we have a lot of love and a lot of support for. There's areas of Albert's game that we've seen so far in the limited sample size that has been, and we're like, okay, hey, this guy, if used the right way, has all the tools to be a successful tight end here in the NFL. Could be a game changer, could be a big-time role player that can help the Broncos offense improve in areas maybe where they haven't. Like we're talking red zone offense. We're talking about being able to move the chains consistently on 3rd down. Albert O is the prototype of a guy who can fit the mold of what the Broncos need. But, I mean, he's going to have to also improve in some other areas. Let's talk about Albert O here.
I think after Noah Fant was sent to the Seattle Seahawks in that Russell Wilson trade, what was interesting is how many Broncos fans kind of anointed very quickly Albert Okwuegbunam as that tight end one. And I was kind of in the camp, Cody, and you remember this, of just me kind of saying, I don't think that he should necessarily just be given that job. I felt like the Broncos needed to bring in a free agent to compete with him, or maybe draft someone to compete with him. And of course, they ended up doing that. But I think that this competition is going to potentially bring out the best in Albert O. Like, they're entrusting him, like you said. He said that in that interview earlier this offseason, that really that could be his job to lose. And I think that that's the best position that he could be in entering training camp, is having that position as his to lose. Because if he can go out there and win that position and win that tight end one status, I think that's going to be huge for the Denver Broncos. Because to me, athletically, Albert O really has the highest upside of any tight end on this Denver Broncos roster. We saw against the Philadelphia Eagles last year what he can do. I mean, making that crazy catch and running almost for a touchdown deep down the field. I mean, we saw what he could do against the Patriots. We saw the body control in the back of the red zone in his rookie year against the Los Angeles Chargers. We saw what he could do last year on a couple of goal line, reaches where he could get the ball over the pylon, reaching that 6'6" frame over the pylon and making plays. So to me, he has the highest upside athletically. And that's saying something, because Greg Dulcich is a very good athlete at the position, but you don't find very many 6'5", 6'6" guys at 260 plus pounds that can run a 4.49 in the 40-yard dash. So Albert O, he's a freakish athlete. The question is this year, can he really put it all together? That's going to be a big thing. Can he eliminate those drops that we saw in his rookie season? And can he make those plays deep downfield? Even that game against the Ravens, you remember that one as well, the drop touchdown that could have changed the game. Those are the things that I think Alberto needs to grow from and really eliminate to become that tight end one.
I think you spoke on it perfectly. I mean, there's areas of his game on these things that are fixable, right? It's not like there's a glaring need or a glaring area of concern with Alberto's game. I mean, these are things that can be fixed. And realistically, it's not that he's just dropping the ball. I feel more so, Sayre, they're more so concentration drops. And going back to that Ravens game, I mean, we could have blown the game wide open in a sense of giving the Broncos a little bit more momentum, because the Ravens had marched downfield, if I'm not mistaken. It was right after that Hollywood Brown deep touchdown reception, or the Broncos could have answered back. Just things like that, I feel like he can grow off of. But also, I think we also forget too, for him, there was also a little bit of the mental hurdle of coming back from an ACL injury, one that he sustained during his very promising rookie season. And there's a little bit of time, because that happened pretty much midway through the season, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a process, because if there's a meniscus, if there's an MCL, an LCL on top of just an ACL, it does take some time. And I do remember last year at training camp, the Broncos were really just kind of ramping him up slowly, day by day, gradually getting him to do more. And he was ready by week one, which is a good sign for this team. But how can he impact the Broncos offense in a bigger way here? I think you said it perfectly. When you look at the different kind of combinations the Broncos can run, whether it be out of 12 personnel, where they have two tight ends and one running back on the field there, you can get creative. I mean, Albert O can be an inline guy. Now, granted, I'm still in the same boat. I don't want to put Albert O in a one-on-one situation against an elite pass rusher. That's just not necessarily what you want to do. However, I'm not opposed to having some help, like chip help. And if the Broncos go with a little bit of a hybrid fullback approach, like we've seen with Andrew Beck, or even in Eric Saubert or Eric Tomlinson, put an extra guy there as a wing, or as an extra guy on the end man of the line of scrimmage to help out in a situation like that. Attack the pass rusher, chip release 1001, whether it be to the flat, whether it be a sit route, whether it be a corner. You can get creative here. And I imagine that's what Nathaniel Hackett is going to try to devise a game plan as to how he can unleash a little bit more of Albert Okwuegbunam. But when his number is called upon this season, Sayre, you're right. He does have to answer the call there. And like you mentioned with some of the plays that we saw, I mean, we saw it in the New York Giants game. He is a guy that has the body flexibility, the bend and the athleticism that you're talking about. I mean, we'll go to the Giants game on that fourth down play where Teddy was scrambling, pressure in his face, dumps it to Albert O, and he stretches out and gets the touchdown. He did the same exact thing against the Los Angeles Chargers this year in their matchup in Denver. I like what I've seen from Albert O, and I think that the Broncos could be in very good hands if both he and Greg Dulcich have success this upcoming season, because it's almost like pick your poison. You look at the Broncos receivers, we've talked about them ad nauseum. There's so much hype and electricity surrounding them. There's hype and electricity surrounding Melvin Gordon, Javonte Williams, Russell Wilson at quarterback. But I tell you what, as this is the one position group on this team that really has a lot to prove, that is kind of the unknown question mark coming into the season, I like the odds of them being able to answer the bill and coming up big for this Broncos team here in 2022. But really realistically, behind Greg Dulcich and Albert Okwuegbunam, there lies a question as to who will be the next man up when the Broncos go to a 3 tight end set out of 13 personnel. What might that look like? We talk about Eric Sauber, Eric Tomlinson, and Andrew Beck coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at Built Bar, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. And Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market today. And if you have not tried their brand new flavor, the coconut brownie chunk puff flavor, you are missing out. It is marshmallow fluff covered in coconut brownie flavor. And guess what? It's a healthy protein bar to boot. 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. You can try this Built Bar and the 9 amazing original flavors at built.com here today. And make sure when you go to checkout, you use promo code LOCK15. You know what that's going to do? That's going to get you 15% off your next order at built.com. How might the Denver Broncos tight end 3 work into the mix this upcoming season with the excitement and the hype surrounding Greg Dulcich and Albert Okwuegbunam, and who could be that under-the-radar guy? We continue our conversation on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, on the tight end position. And Sayre, really want to start focusing things here on Eric Sauber, who came back this offseason. One of the best Broncos special teams guys last season. In the previous regime, we were unsure about what his future was going to hold, whether or not the Broncos were going to bring him back, but he was so great for the room. George Paton decided to bring him back, even after they signed Eric Tomlinson from the Baltimore Ravens to a 1-year deal, even though they re-signed Andrew Beck to a contract extension this offseason. There's a lot of questions, though, as to like who will come out ahead, because, Sayre, when I look at tight end 3 for the Broncos, I think we have to get a better idea and an understanding. What does Nathaniel Hackett envision for this position outside of Dulcich and Albert O? I mean, do you want a guy who can block pass rushers, who's more so like an offensive tackle? And when I look at Eric Tomlinson, I don't think he's going to add any value to the Broncos' passing attack, but as a run blocker, a guy who can set things up in the running game, be an extra pass protection guy, I feel like he's an additional security blanket that the Broncos could add there. However, it's hard to ignore when you have a guy of the size of Eric Sauber who moves the way that he can at his size, when he can be utilized as a receiver. I mean, we didn't see him utilized enough as a receiver last season for Denver, but he was utilized in the blocking game, and you can make the argument he was the best blocking tight end that the Broncos have. So, like, in your opinion, how do you view this tight end room with guys like Tomlinson, Sauber, and even when you look at other guys like Andrew Beck, who's going to play that hybrid fullback, H-back tight end position?
Well, I think it's really nice that there's such a diversity of skills there with all of those guys. And even the guys that you mentioned, they all got brought in or brought back this year for this season. And in addition to all that, remember the Broncos worked out veteran Kyle Rudolph back in April as well. So they've obviously been looking at the same question that we're looking at right now. Like, how is this tight end 3 going to work out? Like, what do we actually want there? Do we want like the Saubert who could round out our special teams? Do we want the Eric Tomlinson who could be an extension of the offensive line, so to speak? Or do we want Andrew Beck who could play that versatile role, maybe some fullback, maybe do some tight end, maybe do some of this and some of that, special teams as well? Obviously, Andrew Beck, very strong in that regard as well. So I'm fascinated to find out myself. I mean, this is going to be fun to watch just because all 3 of these guys, they have similar cap hits. They have similar this, that, and the other. And what's going to separate them? Like, what are the Broncos seeking? Are they seeking that bigger upside in the passing game? Because to me, what you really have to think about here is what happens if something happens to Dulcich or Okwuegbunam. And in that case, who do you want to have on the roster? To me, I tend to wonder, is that guy on the team right now? You know, is it a Kyle Rudolph who's still a free agent at the time of this recording, or do you keep 4 tight ends and really protect yourself in that event and then keep an additional one on the practice squad as well? Just from a roster building perspective, it's so tough to know right now because Saubert last year, we saw him really make some nice plays in the running game as a blocker. We saw him have that receiving touchdown, which I believe was the first of his NFL career against the Chargers. And then obviously you've got Andrew Beck, who he showed a lot of promise. Remember back in that 2019 season when the Broncos plucked him off of waivers from the Patriots, and he showed some upside doing those deep crosses over the middle of the field against the Houston Texans. I mean, it's one of those position groups to me where maybe you're not completely settled there, and there's some undrafted guys that could factor in as well. But to me, I wonder, do the Broncos actually have that third guy on the roster? Because if they do, they really have to decide what's most important to us. A, if somebody gets injured, or B, if everybody stays healthy, this guy gives us the best blank this season.
Well, and even the hard part too, I'm thinking of it from a roster construction standpoint. If I'm the personnel department, you have to factor in. We've already discussed here on the show. If we were looking at cornerbacks, safeties, wide receivers, how many players we would choose to keep on that position on the active roster. Tight end becomes a very, very difficult one. I think that you have your shoe in for the two guys, Dulcich and Albert O. And then outside of that's kind of left open. So if you're having a guy like Andrew Beck who's going to play that fullback role, does he have a designated backup? And if so, is that guy viewed more so as Eric Tomlinson? Is it viewed as Eric Sauber? So, I mean, in a realistic situation, could the Broncos keep three tight ends being Dulcich, Alberto, and Saubert as those primary guys that are going to be receiving options? And then you have Beck, and you also have a guy like Tomlinson who will rotate as kind of that fullback guy. And you mentioned practice squad. I don't know if the Broncos could stash one of these guys on the practice squad without him being plucked away necessarily. And you don't want to do that. Obviously, that's not going to happen with Alberto. It's not going to happen with Dulcich. Saubert, I think, is valued too highly on the special team side. There's going to be some interesting decisions that are going to have to be made here. And I'm glad, Sayre, I don't have to make this decision because I feel like this could be a very solid under the radar unit. But until we see what the Broncos offense really looks like with Nathaniel Hackett and how the tight end position will be used, whether or not they really involve a fullback in a way they kind of did in Green Bay, God, there's going to be some unanswered questions that we're going to see probably till the first or second preseason game in terms of offensive schemes, because we simply won't see enough until that week one matchup comes. And even then, it's just a little bit of a taste as the team will wrap things up gradually week in and week out throughout the regular season. So, I mean, this could be a blessing in disguise. It could be a good problem to have for Denver right now. I'd say tight end probably remains the biggest question mark in terms of how many they're going to keep, how they're going to be utilized, and what the order may be and what they envision for the offense and that tight end position as is for this Broncos football team. Broncos country, we want to know what your thoughts are on this subject matter. Let us know in the YouTube comment section down below. Thank you once again for tuning in to Lockdown Broncos, listening, whether you're listening or tuning in our favorite podcast provider, whether you're watching us on YouTube. If you're a brand new viewer or listener of today's episode of the show, and it's your first time checking us out, if you like the Broncos talk that you get this every single day, all year long, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. Make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage. Get involved in the discussion. We love interacting with everybody in Broncos country, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree with us. We appreciate you so much. In tomorrow's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we're going to play a little bit of a game with the Broncos edge rushers, and we maybe make the case as to why the Broncos edge rusher position could be in the best hands possible with Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb if they remain healthy. What does that mean for the Broncos? You get that on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.